Jennifer was sitting in the room with her mom and watching the news on TV. There were a lot of reports of kidnappings that summer. The evening edition again told about how a man kidnapped a little boy. The girl was watching what was happening with half an eye, when suddenly a familiar face attracted her attention. There was a picture of her classmate Sharon on the screen, but for some reason the reporter called her by the name Tanya. It also said that she died in an accident. Jennifer was horrified by this news, but an even more terrible discovery awaited her. A photo of the kidnapper was shown on the screen, stating that it was Tony's husband. Jennifer knew this face very well, and it was not her husband at all, but the father of her classmate. In the last issue, I analyzed in detail the story of the abduction of little Michael Hughes. But behind this terrible story lies an even more terrible secret. Today you will learn the shocking truth about the identity of his mother and who his abductor really was. Hi, my name is T and I love collecting creepy stories, urban legends and mystical theories. I invite you to take a walk in the dark corners, where the fabric of reality is particularly thin and through it you can look straight into the abyss. And in order not to miss new releases, subscribe to the channel right now and put a bell, so you will definitely receive a reminder. Feel free to follow me, but remember one rule: don't turn around. Sharon Marshall was attractive, smart and very sociable. She was one of the best students at the school and dreamed of becoming an aerospace engineer. The girl managed to successfully pass the exams at the Georgia Institute of Technology and get a full scholarship. In honor of this event, her father even ordered congratulations in the local newspaper, where Sharon's photo was printed full page. Warren Marshall raised his daughter alone. Sharon told others that her mother died in a car accident. But one day Warren announced at a school meeting that his wife had died of cancer. Sharon was constantly changing schools, and this was associated with her father's work. Warren was a domineering, irritable man. Sharon was an ideal student who never had behavioral problems, but at the same time, no matter what important classes were at school, she left at 16:30 every day to have time to cook dinner for her father. After the move, Sharon and Jennifer continued to maintain a relationship. Jennifer found out that Sharon gave birth to a boy, whom she gave up for adoption to a certain rich couple in Texas, and then got a job at a hotel in Phoenix. Imagine the surprise of Jennifer and her parents when Sharon came to visit them in the summer of 1986. She seemed completely free, for the first time in her life. For the next 2 weeks, Jennifer and Sharon enjoyed the summer. But then Sharon turned to the Fisher family with a serious question. She said that she wanted to go to a technical institute, and before classes started, she planned to find a job, and asked if she could stay with the Fisher family for that time. Unfortunately, the Fishers refused her. Sharon returned to Arizona and Jennifer and Sharon never met again. For some time they continued to call occasionally. In the fall of 1986, Sharon underwent breast augmentation surgery and began working at a strip club in Tampa, Florida. It was a first-class bar where rich customers spent their time. Often the workers were invited to the Millionaires Club parties, where, according to the conditions, they had to dance 3 dances, without privates and touches, after which the girls left with earnings from $500 to $1,000 in one evening. One day, Sharon's boss took her to such a party. But half an hour later, one of the guests came up to her and asked her to take Sharon away. It turned out that she was standing near the toilet and offered men's sex services for $50. When the boss asked the girl why she was doing this, she replied that her father made her. Soon, Cher's stomach began to grow. She didn't tell anyone that she was pregnant, but it gradually became obvious to everyone around her. She gave birth to a son, whom she named Michael, in 1988. In the same year, Warren and Sharon Marshall, father and daughter, disappeared. They were replaced by Tony and Clarence Hughes, who had married and were now living as husband and wife. In 1990, Susan fell in love and, inspired by a new relationship, decided to escape. Taking her son with her, she left Franklin, but he quickly found her. In April of the same year, Susan was found knocked down and barely alive on the side of a suburban highway. And we already know the further development of events. But when detectives began to investigate the case of Franklin Floyd, they stumbled upon some inconsistencies. In 1990, Cher was 20 years old on Letton. This means that she was born around 1970, when Floyd was behind bars, so he could not be her father. Which means he kidnapped Sharon when she was still a child. Franklin Delano Floyd was born in Barnesville, Georgia. He is the youngest of 5 children in the family of Thomas and Della Floyd. Shortly after Floyd's first birthday in 1944, his father, a cotton factory worker and alcoholic, died of kidney and liver failure at the age of 32. His mother, widowed at the age of 29, hardly earned a living on her own, so she and her children lived with their parents in a small apartment. In 1946, Floyd's grandparents found it harder to take care of a large family, and they asked Della and her children to move. Floyd and his siblings were placed in the care of a Baptist orphanage. There were people with no experience working with children who relied heavily on physical punishment for the good upbringing of proper Christians, a cornerstone of the American culture of violence. It is likely that all the horrors that Franklin Delano Floyd had to endure in the following years turned him into the monster that he would later become. The children were divided according to their age groups. Brothers and sisters were not allowed to communicate with each other. The mother of 5 children, Della, often asked to visit the children, but since she refused her parental rights, the staff of the orphanage refused her requests. Franklin was a pretty smart boy, but his manners were considered very feminine by others. Peers often beat him when their guardians were not around, but continued to tease and mock him even when they were. As Franklin will recall later, it was in an orphanage at the age of 6 that he was sexually abused. He was raped with a broomstick. He was also severely punished by the staff. For example, as a teenager, his hand was dipped in hot water after he was caught masturbating. Floyd also often got into trouble for fighting and stealing. In 1959, Franklin broke into a neighbor's house, where he stole food. The orphanage communicated with one of her older sisters, Dorothy, who had left school a few years earlier. They told her that if Franklin moved in with her, no charges would be filed against him. Dorothy agreed, and Franklin was sent to live with her. But just a few weeks later, Dorothy's husband told her that he wanted Franklin to leave their house. He considered the guy reckless and dangerous and did not want him to be near their children. After several months of wandering, Franklin managed to find his mother Della, about whom he had vague memories. He knew that she had moved and married several times after Thomas Floyd's death. He was able to track her to Indianapolis, where he discovered she was working as a prostitute. One can only guess how this affected Franklin's psyche, but he did not stay with Della for long. Over the next 2 weeks, Franklin convinced Della to help him forge his legal papers, which allowed him to enlist in the army. He went to serve in California, but he was kicked out of the army less than 6 months later when it was discovered that he was a minor and forged documents for enrollment. When Franklin tried to find his mother again in Indianapolis, she disappeared. From that moment on, Franklin Floyd began to drift all over the country. Records show that he visited most corners of the United States, including cities such as Philadelphia, New York, Miami, Atlanta, New Orleans and Los Angeles. On the 9th of February, 1960, Franklin Floyd was only 60 years old. He decided to break into the store where he was going to steal a gun. However, the police arrived very quickly on the incoming signal, with whom Franklin engaged in a shootout. The officers came out of the shootout with no casualties, and Franklin was wounded. He was operated on, and then he was arrested, but after a psychiatric examination he was released. He returned to Hopeville, where he got a job at Atlanta International Airport. It was then that Franklin decided to commit one of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Franklin Delano Floyd kidnapped a 4-year-old girl who was at a local bowling club, took her to a nearby forest and sexually abused her. Floyd was arrested and charged with kidnapping and child molestation. Floyd pleaded not guilty, but was sentenced to a lengthy prison sentence for his crime. In November of the same year, he was sent to the hospital for psychiatric testing, from where, just a couple of months later, he escaped by driving a car. On the same day, he managed to rob a bank for $6,000, after which he was caught. In July 1963, a year after the conviction of the child's adulthood, he was convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to 15 years in federal prison in Ohio. Just 2 months after that, he tried to escape again, but this time it ended in failure from the very beginning. He was immediately captured along with 2 other prisoners, and an additional 5 years were added to his sentence. He was transferred to a federal prison in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Franklin Floyd was locked in a personal hell with monsters like himself. He was regularly beaten and raped by other prisoners. He tried to commit suicide, but when the attempt failed, he was admitted to a psychiatric ward for several months, and then returned to prison again, where the beating and rape continued. For several years, Franklin was transferred from prison to prison, but the attitude of prisoners to the child molester was the same everywhere. Franklin Delano Floyd was granted amnesty in November of 1971. Until January 19, 1973, Floyd remained under supervision, but after that he became an absolutely free man. Just a week later, on January 27, Franklin tried to kidnap a young woman at a gas station. Pretending that his finger was a gun, he dragged the woman into his car, where he tried to rape her. But fortunately, she managed to escape, and Floyd was once again arrested. Franklin did not appear in court and a warrant was issued for his arrest. However, Franklin was not found. And only 20 years later, this warrant will come up when Floyd gives his Social Security number when receiving insurance payments after the death of Tony Hughes. In 1974, Floyd met Sandra Chipman under the assumed name of Brand Williams. Sandra was the mother of 4 children from her previous 2 marriages: Susanna Savakis, Allison, Amy and Philippa. Floyd and Sandra got married, and he officially became the stepfather of her children. In 1975, Sandra was arrested by the police for using a fake check and sentenced to a month of arrest. When the woman returned home from prison, she found neither her new husband nor her children there. Contacting the police did not give her any result, since she married Brandon Williams. He was the stepfather of the children and by law had the right to do with them as he saw fit. She managed to find her 2 daughters, Allison and Amy, at the local church, where they were abandoned by Brandon. Unfortunately, the fate of 1-year-old Philip is unknown to this day, and the fate of 5-year-old Susan was only established in the 2014 year, when she had already been dead for more than 20 years. As you might have guessed, Susan Savaki is the real name of the girl known as Tony Hughes and Sharon Marshall. She lived almost all her life with a real monster, but at the same time she remained a kind, sweet, beautiful and intelligent girl. Absolutely everyone who knew her was amazed by her humanity and optimism. At the same time, Franklin Floyd claimed that his psyche was broken by abuse in childhood. Why, then, didn't Susan turn into a psychopath, enduring violence and bullying from Floyd? Apparently, not every mind is capable of creating a monster.